Right before school started, Jimmy stopped by the house. We sat at the kitchen table and ate peanuts. That's it, he said. No more tournaments this summer. He shook his head. I'm sure going to miss playing, and I'm going to hate being cooped up in some classroom again. School's not so bad, I said. He threw his head back. For you it isn't, but I can't believe I've still got 2 more years before I graduate. After that, we talked about nothing for a while. I turned the radio to the Giants game. Jimmy wasn't listening, though. I could tell there was something he wanted to say, but couldn't bring it out. Finally, he said, listen, Seth, my father is getting married Saturday up in Portola Valley at some little chapel. He said I could invite one person, and I was wondering, his voice trailed off. I'm not doing anything, Jimmy, I said. I'll go. Saturday at noon, Jimmy pulled up in front of my house in his father's red Camaro. My mother panicked. I didn't know Jimmy was going to drive, she said as he was walking to the front door. I razzed her. Once they post my grade for driver's ed, I'll be getting my license. We're not little boys. I know, but those roads up to Portola Valley are tricky. Oh, Mom, I said, don't worry. When Jimmy came in, she started with the advice. Cars on those mountain roads veer out. I didn't think she'd ever stop. I'm sorry, I said to Jimmy when we finally made it out of the house. Don't sweat it, he said. My mother is the same way. On Woodside Road, we got stuck behind some old Plymouth Valiant poking up the hill. Jimmy pulled out, put the pedal to the floor. The Camaro zoomed past. What do you think of my car? Your car, I said, not sure I'd heard him right. He nodded. Yeah, my father gave it to me. You're kidding. No joke. I think he feels guilty about getting married again. He's trying to make up. He popped a cassette into the tape deck. Check out the sound system. It took half an hour to get to the chapel, and the wedding lasted all of 10 minutes. I thought the woman Mr. Winter was marrying would be young and maybe a little sexy, like the woman I'd seen him with, but she wasn't. Her name was Elizabeth Strong. She worked in San Francisco as an X-ray technician, and she played the violin. She had silver black hair and a proud face. When she said, I do, her voice was loud and clear. At the reception, she came over to where Jimmy and I were sitting. I stood, shook her hand. I heard, you're quite a student, she said, which threw me off because I couldn't figure why she'd be treating me like I was 10 years old. Whoops, I'm sorry. I couldn't figure why she'd ever be talking about me. But she had kind eyes, and she didn't treat me like I was 10 years old. When she left, I told Jimmy I liked her. She's okay, he said. She doesn't try too hard to be big buddies with me. The big mystery is why she's marrying my father. We milled around, sipping Cokes, eating sandwiches. Finally, Jimmy's father and his new wife cut the cake. A little later, they drove off, horn honking. Let's get out of here, Jimmy said as soon as the car disappeared around the corner. When we reached the Camaro, he stopped. I've got an idea. Wait here a second. He ran into the hall. When he came back, he had something wrapped in a towel. At least the afternoon won't be a total waste, he said, laughing. He pulled the towel back and showed me a couple of bottles of champagne. I should have said something right then and there. Maybe that would have kept the rest of it from happening, but I didn't. I didn't even think of saying anything. Jimmy took a hard right off Mountain Home Road and drove up a fire trail. This is a good place, he said. Nobody can see us from the road. The champagne went down easy. It was great to sit in the cool shade underneath the oak trees and silently sip from the ice-cold bottle. As we passed the champagne back and forth, a pleasant numbness came over me. After he popped the cork on the second bottle, Jimmy leaned his head back, closed his eyes. You know something, Seth, he said. This summer, playing those all-star teams, I studied every shortstop, and not one of them was as good as me. Not one. None of them hit as good as me. None of them fielded like I do. I was the best of the best. He opened his eyes and looked at me. Does that sound like bragging? I sipped some champagne, passed the bottle back to him. It's not bragging, to tell the truth. He took a swig, shook his head. My father's the reason I'm so good. Without him, I'd be nothing. I don't know about that, I said. You'd be good even without him. You're a natural. He sort of snickered. Yeah, maybe I'd be good, but not like I am. Not the best. There was a strange smile on his face. I'm going to be a major leaguer, Seth, and my father, the biggest jerk in the world, is the reason. He paused. Life sure is crazy, isn't it? I thought about my own father, about the influence he would have on my life. If he'd lived, I'd be a different person. There is no doubt about it. But how? How would I be different? What parts of me would he have brought into the light, and what parts of me would he have darkened? That is the mystery. It sure is, I said at last. It sure is. I chugged some more of the champagne and passed the bottle to him, and he finished it off. We sat there for a good 10 minutes, listening to the wind in the trees, thinking our own thoughts. Finally, Jimmy started the car. When he took off down Mountain Home Road, he burned rubber for at least 100 yards. Somehow, Jimmy made it back. I say somehow because I know I couldn't have. I felt seasick. My knees were wobbly, my ears were ringing. Once I was home, my mother asked the typical questions, and I gave her the typical answers, or I thought I did. But after a few minutes, she stared at me hard. Seth, you're drunk. I'm not drunk, I said, fighting to act normal. Oh, yes, you are, she answered coolly. I only had one glass of champagne, I insisted. Being drunk is bad enough. Don't be a liar, too. I tell you, I'm not drunk. I only had one or maybe 2 glasses of champagne, that's all. She glared. Go to your room, young man. I don't even want to look at you. I was fuming when I slammed my bedroom door shut and hopped onto the bed. I hated being called a liar. I hated being called a drunk. And the fact that I was a drunk and that I was a liar made me hate it even more. I tried to read the sports page, but the words kept jumping around on the page. I lay back and closed my eyes. When I awoke, it was 2 in the morning. My head ached and my throat was incredibly dry. I was hungry, but the thought of eating made me gag. I took a long shower, then crawled back into bed, and I don't think I'd be able to sleep, but I did. My mother was waiting for me at the breakfast table. Don't tell me. Let me guess. You have the 24-hour flu. I'd never heard her more sarcastic. No, I answered. I was drunk. She sipped her coffee. Well, at least you admit it. That's something. Not a whole lot, but something, I suppose. I suppose Jimmy got drunk too? I nodded. She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about this all night, Seth, and here's what's going to happen. She paused and took another sip of her coffee. First, you're clearly not old enough to handle the responsibility of a driver's license, so you will not get your license when your grade is posted. I swallowed. When will I get it? I asked. We'll let 6 months go by, and then we'll talk again. 6 months was bad, but I was afraid she was going to say a year or even 2. And there's another thing. For as long as you live in this house, you are not, I repeat, not, to get in a car if Jimmy Winter is driving. Oh, Mother, I said. It's not like he's drunk all of the time. Her eyes got the fiery look that I've seen only a few times but in my life. Do you think you've got another life in the bank that you can go get if you lose this one? Do you think I've got another son hidden in some closet? You are not to get in a car with that boy again, understood? It was pointless to argue. Okay, I won't go anywhere with Jimmy if he's driving. Does that make you happy? No, she replied. None of this makes me happy. That sentence got to me. It wasn't so much the words she said, but the way she had said them. She sounded more than hurt. She sounded wounded. All day I felt miserable. She'd raised me. By herself she'd raised me, and she taught me right from wrong, and she trusted me to do right, and I'd let her down. It's never going to happen again, I vowed to myself. It's never going to happen again. And then later that night at dinner, at the moment in my life when I least wanted to argue with my mother, we argued. I've been thinking, she said, that maybe you need a man's influence in your life. How would you feel if I called Big Brothers in? I broke in right there. No, I said, shaking my head. No, nothing like that. You can't do that. I absolutely don't want anything like that. But couldn't you just try once, Seth? She pleaded. How could it hurt? Just once. That's all I'm asking. I put my hands to my head. Mother, I said, I won't do it. It's impossible. She closed her eyes for a long time, and when she opened them, they were filled with tears. Sometimes I feel as if you want me to do the impossible. I can't be both mother and father to you, Seth. I know you can't, Mother, I answered softly, and I'm not asking you to be. I just want you to be my mother. And you won't let me call? I shook my head. She took a deep breath. All right, I won't. She paused. Let's eat dinner. I still feel rotten whenever I think about that conversation. Sometimes I think I should have let my mother call Big Brothers, that I should have gone one time like she wanted. But what would have been the point? I would have just had to say no later. Maybe some guys in my situation would have wanted a man to be a second father to them, but I didn't. My father is dead. I barely remember him, but nobody is ever going to take his place.